This is the Insta360 GO 3 Complete Features and Settings Guide. If you've just got this camera or you're thinking about getting this camera, this is going to be the perfect video for you because we'll be going through all the features and modes within the camera and the action pod itself. And I'll also be going through every single setting so you can find out where it is and what it means so you're not going through instruction manuals to find out what you need. Hope it's helpful, and let's dive into it. Okay, so welcome to this guide of the Insta360 GO 3. So I've got the GO 3 inside the action pod right now and I've turned it on. And it's important to note that when you turn it on, it will load up the last mode that you were using. So for me, that's 1440p at 30 frames per second. You've obviously got the on button on the right, the record button on the top, and a quick switch button on the right. When you use the quick switch button, it goes between all the different modes that it's laid out for you. Now, of course, you can create your own custom modes if you, let's just come out of that for now. If you go into, let's say you wanted a photo mode where it's in and raw and 3-second timer, something like that, and then you want to save that as a preset, you could go to here and then click the little plus button and you can choose the name of it. Generally, I choose a custom preset, and then you can see all of your settings here and what you're saving at. So I'm saving that to custom 2 at the moment. Save that, and that's in there as well, so that every time you go and hit the quick switch button, you've got all of those modes plus your C2 there as well. Now, if you didn't want the quick switch button to change your presets, you can also just use it to change the standard modes by clicking that button at the top there and switch back to presets. Okay, so what have you got on the main screen then? Well, let's start from the top left. You've got your SD card space. Now that number changes depending on which mode you're in. So at the moment we've got 2000 photos available in this mode, but if we go over to video and click that, in 1440p 30 frames per second video, we've got 2 hours and 6 minutes left up there. So on the top right, you've got a tiny little image of the GO 3 with a little charging icon there to say that the action pod is actually charging the GO 3. And then you've got the battery life of the action pod there, which will be draining because it's charging the actual GO 3 itself. Underneath that, you've got an indication of what color mode you're in. So at the moment it says vivid there. I'm not sure if you can see that very well. And on the bottom right, you've got the focal length that you're in. So you can go ultra wide, which is as wide as it goes and does have some distortion. You can go to action mode, which is a little bit less distortion, a little bit less wide. And then you've got linear, which is more for sort of daily activities, a more natural field of view with not as much distortion. In the bottom left here, we have a little bubble with the mode you're in and the sort of settings within that mode. So if you click that, it brings up the different modes and you can choose between photo, video, free frame video, all of the different modes. Let's go over to photo then. And then next to that is the settings within that mode. So you can just click that and you can go 16:9, 9:16, change all your settings. We'll get into all of that in a minute. But you don't have to click these little buttons. You can just swipe up from the bottom to change your settings. And if you want to change your mode, you can just swipe across the screen like that. You don't actually need to tap the little buttons down here. If you swipe from the right of the screen then, you've got your manual controls. So you can go in and you can change your exposure. At the moment I've got it set to auto, but you can change the exposure compensation. If you feel like it's coming out a little bit too dark, you can sort of raise that to, +2, or if you feel like it's coming out too bright, you can go to -1.5. I generally leave it on about 0.5 because I quite like it where it is there. But if you wanted to go and dial in manual exposure, you can also do that by clicking manual here, and you can dial in your ISO and shutter speed with these 2 buttons here. Again, I like leaving it in auto. You've also got the color modes here, so by default it's on vivid, but you can go and switch between the different modes. There's also a few little presets where it's almost color grading the footage for you to make it warmer or cooler or change the contrast. And I quite like these because they are designed for specific scenes, but generally I keep it in vivid because I think that's where this camera shines. Underneath that we have the white balance. Again, it's set to auto, but again, you can change it manually if that's something that you want to do. Swiping from the top then, you have your settings, which we'll get into in a minute, and swiping from the left, you have your preview window, which you can just scroll through and play back the files that you want to play back. You've got the volume controls here on the left, so you can click that and change the volume. You can pause just like that, and you can also scrub across the video using the bar on the bottom there. On the top right, there's a little bin, which is the delete button, obviously, and on the top left, You can click that button to get into the different icons and scroll through like that, rather than having to scroll through one clip at a time. Okay, so let's go back into video mode and let's explore some of the settings. So if we scroll down from the top, the first thing on the top left is the orientation lock. So obviously if you turn this to the side, it's going to want to record in vertical, but to stop that from happening, when you turn it to the side, you can turn on orientation lock, and so you'll always be recording in landscape there. The next button is to lock the screen. Now sometimes you want to mount this, but you want to make sure that you don't accidentally touch it and change a setting. So you can lock that screen, and when you go to unlock it, you can just slide up to unlock that. The next one is your volume control. So this will make some noises when you're pressing record or changing settings or clicking buttons. I normally change this to mute, but you can have it on low, medium or high if you wanted those noises. There's a brightness control for the screen, so you can go super bright for the screen or super dim. I normally go about here for when I'm recording, just because I want the camera to be able to pick up the full screen. On the bottom left here, we have quick capture. Now let me demonstrate what quick capture does. So if I turn quick capture on and turn off the camera, if I hit the record button, the camera should turn on and start recording in the last mode that we used. So that's recording now, and then I hit the record button again, that will turn back off, and now that's off. And that's basically what quick capture does. Obviously great for if you've just got it in your pocket and you don't want to have to turn it on and change your modes and do your settings and then get recording. You can just have it set to quick capture, and that will automatically do it for you. After that, we have voice control. So if you click voice control here, turn that on, choose your language, and then you've got a few different voice commands here. So the top one is take a photo. So if I go to this and say, take a photo, take a photo, take a photo, take a photo, take a photo. Okay, so that took a few different attempts, but it did it in the end. So what it's going to do is it's going to take a photo in the last setting we were in, which was 9:16 there. So that's what voice control does. So if we turn that off for now. So the next setting is pre-recording. So this is really clever. So let's say you're pointing your camera at something, you don't know when something's going to happen, but you want to capture that moment, but you don't want to waste all of your space on your hard drive. You can set it to pre-record. So essentially what this does, if I show you now, is we'll go into settings, and you can essentially record 10, 15 or 30 seconds before you actually hit the record button. You have to set this up every single time, but when you start recording, you'll see that it now counts up to 15. So this is basically pre-recording before you've even hit the record button. So now it's hit 15, this will continuously record 1 second at the end and delete the first second, so that when you're ready to record, let's say I put my hand in front of it now and then press record, you'll see that starts from 15 seconds and counts up. So everything 15 seconds before that, including my hand going in front of it, would have recorded. So really interesting and a cool feature if you can make use of it if you want to try and capture something without wasting too much of that SD card space. Now scrolling down again, we've got timed capture. So you can actually set this camera to turn on and record at a certain time. So at the moment you can just change the time like that. You can change what mode you want it in. You can change the settings you want it in. Pretty self-explanatory. You can just set the camera to turn on and record at a specific time. Let's say you're on holiday and you want to set it to record a nice sunset, but you're going for a meal. Just leave it on the balcony tied up or something, and you can get a nice little timed capture there. Swiping to the right then, we've got the audio settings. You've got wind reduction at the top, which will which obviously reduce the wind noise, but it'll reduce some of the lows and prioritize the highs a little bit as well. You've got stereo, which is essentially like the normal mode. It just records from different microphones. And you've got direction focus, which will only record from the front microphone if you want to do something like vlogging. So let's turn that back to wind reduction. And the next option is to add a grid. So that will say grid on. And if we scroll up, you can see there's a rule of thirds grid there if you want to frame up your shot there. Let's turn that off and go into the settings. So at the top, you've got camera info, and if you click that, you've got your serial number and things like that. Not going to get into that at the moment. If you hit general, you can turn off the vibration. So what you can't see or hear in this video is that every time I'm clicking something, there's a tiny little vibration to show that I've clicked it. And that's actually quite nice to have. So I'll leave that on at the moment. And then you've got the indicator light as well, which you can turn off. You see the little light in the top corner there, indicates whether you're recording, whether you've got the camera on. I generally leave that indicator on because I want to know if I'm recording. But if you have that screen flipped over and you're filming yourself and you notice that the red indicator light is sort of affecting the image, then you're going to want to turn that off. Scrolling down then, we've got auto power off. Pretty self-explanatory. That's set to 3 minutes, and an auto sleep where the screen just goes to sleep, but you can tap it to wake up. That's set to 90 seconds. If you hit the camera storage button, you can obviously see how much storage you've got left on the sort of internal storage, and you can also format the card there to delete everything that's on it. So under that we have quick capture settings. Now we showed you quick capture earlier, but this is basically what happens if you press that record button when the camera is off. So at the moment we've got single press set to video, and this basically by default sets it to the last video settings you were in, so the frame rates and the resolutions, but you can add your custom parameters just for the quick capture. So you can change your frame rate, your resolutions, and your ratios here just for the quick capture, which is really handy. And you can also set it for a double press as well. So if you want to double press and it go into a photo, then you can do that. And again, you can have it in the last photo settings that you had, or you can set custom parameters specifically for quick capture. So let's come back out of there. Underneath quick capture settings is the Go 3 button settings. So this is the button that's on the actual Go 3 itself and not the action pod. So when you have the action pod turned off and the Go 3 in hand and on, this is what will happen. So again, you can set single press or double press. And again, you can have custom parameters or set it for the last mode that you used within the shooting mode that you've chosen. So if you choose video, for example, you can go in, you can change the frame rate, the resolution, and you can also change things like the color mode and exposures. So a lot of control over what happens even if you don't have the action pod on here. And again, I'm going to set the double press to photo with custom parameters because I'm going to show you what happens later on. So let's come back out of that. Underneath that, you've got the Wi-Fi settings, you can turn that on. Again, you've got voice control, which we've already been through. You've got the pre-recording settings, which again, have already been through in the other menu. And then you've got video bitrate. I'd leave this on higher. The higher it is, the higher the file size, but also the better the quality is generally going to be. Video sharpness, you can change this from low to medium to high or highest. By default, it's on high. Generally, I prefer things on medium for these sort of cameras because they don't need to be sharpened as much as they actually are. But it does depending on the environment you're on, I think. Auto flicker, you want to set this to 50 Hertz if you're in Europe or the UK, or 60 Hertz if you're in America. But if you're not sure which to choose, just choose auto. And generally this will sort of detect the flicker of the lights and adjust for that. Underneath that, you have the gyro calibration. So essentially, if things aren't working quite well in terms of your stabilization, you can just click gyro calibration and then go through that process to calibrate it. Your language, your certification, which is essentially just all the legal bits. Again, not going to get into that. If you click reset tutorial, let's say you've skipped through some of the things that come up the first time you turn this camera on about how to change your resolutions, frame rates, etc. Or you've forgotten what you've learned in here, you can just reset the tutorial and it will show you all of those things again. And at the bottom, you can factory reset the whole camera. So that's everything within the settings menu of the Go 3. Let's switch between the different modes and see what resolutions and frame rates we have. So I'm going to start at the beginning, where I consider to be the beginning, with photo. So if we go into photo and go into our settings, we have the option between 16:9, 9:16, 1:1 or 2:7:1. 2:7:1 is quite a cool aspect ratio. It's really wide there. You can see wide and narrow. It's got that cinematic look, and it's cool you can take photos in this aspect ratio. So I thought I'd give that one a shout out. So you can take it in Insta360's format, which is INSP, and you can sort of put put that into Insta360 Studio and edit it in there. You can take it in INSP and RAW, or you can take it in Pure Shot, which essentially edits the photo for you and gives you an already edited photo when you connect it to your phone or take it off the camera. On the right, we have the timer. That's pretty self-explanatory, but you can go all the way up to 60 seconds if you need that long between hitting the shutter button and taking the photo. Moving on over then to video and swiping from the bottom. In video, you have a few more options. So you have resolutions all the way up to 2.7K now, and all the way down to 1080p. At 2.7K, you're limited to up to 30 frames per second. At 1080p, you can go up to 50 frames per second, and the same for 1440p as well. On the left, you have your aspect ratios, so you can go 16:9 or 9:16. No 2:7:1 in the video mode, unfortunately, but you can go landscape or portrait. And then you've got the stabilization modes here, so you can go between standard stabilization, turning it off, or go into high. Now, obviously, you want high or max if you're doing something really intense sports in good lighting. That's what you want to go with. Standard is good enough for sort of walking around. I think high is probably the best middle ground. If you've got good lighting and you want really good stabilization, I'd probably leave it on high, to be honest. And in video, swiping from the right does give you the option to change your color mode and also go into a low light stabilization mode. You might want to turn this on if you're in less than ideal lighting conditions and you want your stabilization to be better. Moving on over then to free frame video. Now in free frame video, if we click that to go into it and scroll from the bottom, we have the same options of 16:9 or 9:16. In free frame, it doesn't necessarily matter as much, I guess, because you're going to be framing up afterwards anyway. So again, the option of 1440p up to 50 frames per second and 1080p the same. No 2.7K on the free frame. On the bottom right, again, you can change your field of views, but again, this isn't set in stone, so you can actually go into the Studio app and change the field of view afterwards because you're filming in free frame mode. Switching on over then to time lapse, and if we swipe from the bottom there, we have 1440p at 30 frames per second. That's the only choice we've got there. In the aspect ratio 16:9 or 9:16. And then on the bottom left, we have the interval, so you can click that, and obviously that's going to change the interval of the photos that are being taken and the time lapse. And there's a really handy indication on the right as to how long you're going to be shooting for how much footage you're going to get. So with a 10-second interval, 5 minutes of shooting is going to give you about a second of footage. And you go to 30 seconds and 15 minutes is going to give you a second of footage. So it's really handy to know just when you're picking your intervals how long it's going to take to get the shot that you want. So if I swipe down from there, again, you can choose your field of views even in the time-lapse mode. And if we scroll from the right, again, you have the color profile there. Now if we switch over again to time shift and click that, pretty much the same settings, 1440p up to 30 frames per second, 16:9 or 9:16. This is going to record a kind of basically a video and speed that up so that it looks like a sort of motion lapse style thing. It does work in 15 frames per second as well. Obviously it's going to be speeding up so you won't notice that it's recorded in 15 frames per second. So you can use either of these frame rates and it will look quite good. Moving on then to slow motion. And you'll get a little warning to show if you're shooting in slow motion and you want to shoot in vertical, you have to actually turn the camera vertically. You can't crop it afterwards. Now, if you go into slow motion, it will tell you that to change the aspect ratio, you have to actually rotate the Go 3, and you'll see now it automatically defaults for me to vertical. So you can swipe up from the bottom, but you won't get the option to change aspect ratio or resolution. If you want to shoot in landscape, you do actually just have to turn the action pod 90 degrees like that. But yeah, so you've got 120 frames per second in 1080p, which is pretty good slow motion. And then again, swiping from the right, we've got loop recording. This will just continuously record a certain amount of footage. So ratios, you can go landscape or portrait. Loop duration, this is pretty self-explanatory. This is how long it will record for before starting a new recording. Again, this is for if you want to capture something but you're not quite sure when it's going to happen. So you can just set it on a loop, and then when it does happen, you can just use that recording. At the bottom, you have the stabilization options, and then you have your resolution. This loop recording does go up to 2.7K as it's pretty much just a video recording. Moving on to the next setting, and that is star lapse. Not much here with star lapse. You swipe up and you've got, again, landscape, portrait, 1x1, 2x7x1. It's essentially the same as the time lapse mode where you can change your timer, except it's sort of automatically exposing for you so that you can get that star lapse. And then moving on to interval mode. This is taking photos at specific intervals. So the time-lapse mode will actually sort of combine them all together and you just get one video, which is a time-lapse, whereas this will give you the actual photos if you want a bit more control over that. And again, your same aspect ratios. You can film in INSP or INSP plus RAW, and you can change your intervals of the photos there. And then swiping over, we've got HDR photo as well. So that's the last mode in our little tour of these modes. Swipe up from there, we've got Pure Shot, or INSP. You don't have RAW and HDR photo because it is combining them together already. And you can set a little timer, of course, and change the ratio to any of the photo modes we've spoken about before. The difference with HDR mode is if we swipe from the right here, you'll see how many exposures we're taking here. So HDR is basically combining lots of different exposures in the same shot to create a shot where there's nothing that's overexposed and nothing that's underexposed in theory. The AEB is basically how many shots you're taking at different exposures, and then the EV is basically the exposure at which you want to take each photo. So you've got one at +1, you can go to 0.6, 0.3, all the way up to +2. And the more this is, generally the better your HDR is going to be, but that HDR effect might be too much. So we're just going to click one now to see how it looks. So loading that photo, it's not immediately obvious what's happened, but you can see that we're not overexposed over here where there's a bright light, and we're not underexposed here. There's still some information over here. So that's everything on the action pod. Let's go ahead and take the Go 3 out of the action pod now, using the button on the left. So we've got the Go 3 in hand now, and I'm just going to turn off the action pod because I think it's important that the action pod is off for this. So that's automatically turned off the Go 3 itself. But if I want to turn on the Go 3, all I have to do is hold the button on the front of it and it turns it on. Now remember earlier we changed those Go 3 button settings before, and so we had it single press for video. So if I single press it, you'll see a flashing red light, which means we're in video mode. And then if I single press it again, that will stop. And I had double press set to photo. So if I double press that now, you'll just see it will blink off and blink back on, and that's taken a photo. And that's pretty much all you need to know about the pod itself. So I'm going to hold the button again to turn it back off. And this also has a quick capture feature as well, which we set in the settings earlier, where you can obviously double tap to quickly turn it on, get that photo, and then it's going to quickly turn back off again. Or single tap to turn on and start recording the video. So again, those settings we set earlier in the quick capture settings on the action pod and the Go 3 button settings will be really handy when you're actually just using this on its own without the screen. So the next thing I wanted to show you is where these settings are on the phone app. So we're already connected now to the Insta360 GO 3, which is just down here. And you can see this is the screen you're presented with in vertical mode. So we're shooting in landscape at the moment. At the top, we've got our filters, so vivid, standard, and the filters I was talking about earlier. We've got the field of view and the stabilization there as well. And on the top right, we've got our resolutions, frame rates, and settings. Obviously a lot easier to set when you've got it connected to your phone. If we click these three dots, you can turn on the grid that we mentioned before. Let's turn that back off, or you can have a histogram as well, which will show up the top there and can help you light your shot a little bit better as well. On the top left again, it will show how much space is left on the internal storage. It will show that the action pod is charging the Insta360 GO 3 there, and it will show you the percentage charge of the action pod, which is quite nice. On the bottom, you've obviously got the record button. On the right of that, you've got your sort of exposure mode, so auto, or you can obviously switch over to manual. We've been through all of that on the action pod, and you've got your gallery, which we'll go into in a second. And at the bottom is how you switch between all your different modes. So you just swipe left and right like that, and then pretty much the modes are the same there. And when you hit a mode like time lapse, there's an extra little slider button here which changes the interval duration or settings that are specific to that mode. If we hit the gallery then to see what that looks like, that shows a last captured video. You can play, pause, you can go into the different preview modes, you can export that. And of course, I'm not going to get too much into the app at the moment because there's a whole separate video to be made on that. But you can essentially trim your clip. You can add color plus to it, so an extra sort of pop of color there that Insta360 adds on. You can add music, change the volume, change the speed. You can add face filters. You can go ahead, let's get rid of those changes. You can go ahead and take a snapshot from the video if you wanted to take a photo, just like that, and it exports that to your album. I'm gonna have to delete those later. And again, you can change the filters after the fact as well. If you want to get a bit deeper into it, you can actually click this adjust button and you can go and change things yourself, like exposures. You can warm it up, you can change the contrast. Again, everything you're doing to this image is going to make it fall apart more and more, so I wouldn't recommend doing too much to it. But if you wanted to make some basic changes to your clip, this app is a really good way of doing it. And to get into all of your clips, what you want to do is press the back button there, go to your album, and then you can scroll through all of your clips. So let's just have a look at what we got. Just click a clip and then you'll see it plays back. Again, click to pause and we got those settings back again as well. Once you're done editing, or if you just want to export this to your phone, you can click the export button up here. What you want to be doing is going into the highest resolution possible if you're going to post it anywhere. I would probably change the bitrate to the highest as possible as well, and then you're good to go and you can just export that to your device album. Okay, thanks for watching my complete features and settings guide to the Insta360 GO 3. Obviously, if you've got any comments or questions, leave them down below. If it's been helpful, leave a thumbs up for the algorithm and subscribe for more content on tech for creatives. Also, there's likely to be firmware updates after this video, which might change some of the settings and features and where they are. So this is correct as of filming this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.